Hollow Knight's music naturally starts from the menu screen, a soft melody in C minor on the piano. A melody in two parts starting identically, a first impulse that quickly fades out, and a second attempt that stretches a little more, almost turning into a lament. The choice of the piano's high register allows for a very pure sound to be heard, as pure as the vessel, as well as the counterpoint, limpid, the theme on the right hand, and an eighth note accompaniment on the left hand, no chords at the beginning, only arpeggios, incomplete, that don't feel resolved like this vessel that cannot speak. The melody's rhythm is slow and rather regular, with the two initial quarter notes like already heavy steps. But if the game starts with the piano, the knight has an instrumental voice, the viola, which takes up the theme. The C minor key announces the tragic nature of the story and brings out the choice of the viola, whose lowest note is a C. This tragic aspect is reinforced by the use of a register slightly high for the viola in the second part of the theme. At that moment, you can really hear the complaint. The melody then falls silent, the piano resumes while the viola part is limited to tremolos, like a story that one wouldn't really dare to tell anymore. The tension is great when the piano lingers on the leading tone, the B natural, finally resolving on the C, like a cry that would almost never end, before resuming the second part of the theme, shortened and with a different rhythm. It is often emphasized how in Hollow Knight the progression leads us towards the depth of the kingdom, towards the abyss, or even lower still, in the vessel's birthplace. It is more complex since we are constantly divided between this rediscovery of the depth and the return towards the surface, towards the Temple of the Black Egg, and even beyond by invoking the radiance in the Hollow Knight's dream. Reaching Hallownest itself mixes both the ascent and the fall. As shown in the comic about Quirrell to reach Dirtmouth, you have to climb a very steep wall, almost vertical actually, then jump down. It's the first action we see the little vessel do. Then you have to climb again in King's Pass to finally jump down, finally arriving in Dirtmouth. This duality can be seen in a very metaphorical way, the story being obvious and symbolic enough to allow it. I talked about it in the video on the lore. And the leitmotif also emphasizes this duality in a very simple way, since to each ascending impulse will respond a descending resolution which seems to systematically condemn our hopes, all the more so as the ascending part always ends with a long note, which makes the descending part begin on the first beat of the bar, thus on a stressed beat. This opposition will be a key element at the end of the game, which will reach a very poignant dimension given the narrative nature of the music. And then there's the rhythm, which at first does not seem to be able to break out of the binary division of the beats, mostly quarter notes and eighth notes, and which gradually, when the viola takes up the theme and then the piano again, slowly tries to free itself from it just at the end. To further underline with infinite discretion the tragedy that lies ahead, we hear low C, relatively audible at the beginning, held throughout the entire piece, which we can't unhear from the moment we become aware of it. As well as some ethereal sounds that evoke the oniric dimension of the game. All the elements are present even before the game begins. This theme, which I will call for now the Vessel's theme, will follow us up to the end of the adventure, as Hollow Knight's soundtrack uses the leitmotif principle. The different zones, the different bosses, mostly share this theme, although of course the tones and effects used throughout the game do vary. I often say, and by often I mean all the time, that Hollow Knight's music is more narrative than simply descriptive. Indeed, it can not only underline, accompany what's on the screen, describe an area. It already does this, of course, for instance in the choice of instruments in Green Path, the delightful atmosphere of the fungal waste, the grandeur of the City of Tears. But it goes beyond this because for me this theme, just like the royal theme that will appear in a few moments, is associated not with the character but with a function. As I mentioned in the previous video on Hollow Knight, some characters are already seen through a particular prism in the game, so that they are not necessarily seen as beings with all their nuances but as functions. This process is taken to the extreme for the eponymous character and the family to which the playable character belongs. They are vessels, they were created for that purpose only. To me, that's just the way I hear Hollow Knight's score. When you hear this theme, which is often called the Hollow Knight theme, it refers to all vessels, their function, their sacrifice, and this leitmotif is treated to emphasize the way the vessels experience their own sacrifice, whether it's death, as for the broken vessel, resurrected in a poignant battle, or imprisonment for the eponymous character. Finally, there's purity. This is an important element in Hollow Knight. It is what determines how the vessel was chosen by the king. Certainly, the high register used when the leitmotif is first stated evokes this purity, but there's also the phrasing. It is extremely pure. The musical phrase is perfectly shaped, conjuncted, and there are almost no nuances. Each note is almost piercing, and yet the phrase is there, whether it was recorded just like this or with a little help from Cubase. We're at the limit between the note and the phrase, and as a performer, especially as a flutist, I find it absolutely fascinating. There's no way such a phrasing could be done on my instrument because of the need for an actual airflow to sustain the notes. When the viola takes up the theme, it is doubled on the piano, which is now an octave lower than at the beginning. There's a difference in the way the two instruments phrase, the viola being more natural, the bow allows for more flexibility, while the piano remains in this purity. It sounds like the piano shows this objective that the vessels are supposed to reach, at least one of them, while the viola would be a real vessel, as even the Hollow Knight turns out to be impure. Unlike the game, the soundtrack opens with a more dynamic piece, Enter Hallownest, which can be heard in one of the trailers, and ends with the music from the menu. In both cases, we discover the adventure with the leitmotif, since this one is present in Enter Hallownest. However, its more engaged character, more energetic, seems to give hope, which is logical given its function, while the menu version foreshadows the sacrifice of the little hero, whichever end you obtain. The vessel's theme can be heard very quickly in the beautiful introduction, but not immediately. We are now in E minor, and as the first line of Mon Amant the Teacher's Elegy for Hallownest appear on the screen, the piano introduces a new theme, very similar. It could be called the royal theme because it too will be heard in the game, up to the end as well, in the places associated with the paid beings, the king and queen of Hallownest, whose relation of the night we already know about. It's only when the introduction finally shows us the little knight that their theme comes back in E minor, just the first notes after a small motif on the piano as well. The theme is not complete because the adventure is only at its beginning, and it would seem that the knight's memories have faded. The game begins very elegantly with a small timpani effect, always in E, which effectively marks the beginning of a long adventure. It gives a solemn and combative character, it's very nicely done, as well as a few piano notes. Notes that are a source of great joy given that this motif will later punctuate the end of a fight. They are also the very first notes of the leitmotif. But for the first zone, King's Pass, there's no music, only diegetic noises. It's the discovery of Hallownest for the night, the discovery of all the game mechanics for the player. We are not confident enough, it's only in Dirtmouth that the theme comes back. Dirtmouth is indeed a safe place. It's the village where the player regularly returns to in order to access the Forgotten Crossroads, visit the merchants or greet Eldebug. The theme can thus assert itself with enough confidence. Moreover, it is slightly changed to sound less plaintive, yet never joyful. It no longer begins on the tonic, we're still in E minor, and the modified theme starts on an F sharp. The rhythm is different, more free. Therefore it sounds more open, but the uncertainty is still there, precisely because there is no rest on the tonic, not at the beginning. The city is abandoned, Eldebug mentions a tragedy, we are safe, but far from reassured. The music, never radiant, begins on a very low E, the tonic again. We find again the use of arpeggios in the very beautiful piano part. Here they are more active than in the resting grounds, on a wider impetus, in ascending than descending motions, which could be a way to show Eldebug's chatty nature. He has an extended dialogue and gives us clues to progress. However, the harmony itself doesn't evolve much because Dirtmouth is a place which certainly changes during the course of the game, but which one always finds enclosed in its melancholy, just like Eldebug without being completely static. As we venture deeper into the Forgotten Crossroads, we begin to see the extent of this tragedy. Enemies attack us, bodies are piling up in rooms that would like to share a glorious past but only show desolation. It is a place of discovery, a place of questions, seeing as very quickly we meet Quirrell at the Temple of the Black Egg, a key place in the game and the kingdom. We are still weak there, our nail being in quite sorry state. The music is thus limited to ambient pads suited to the different zones. That's why there are more than 3 layers if we add the ambient foreshadowing the boss entrance, the ancestral mound's percussion and the infected crossroads drone afterwards. Only the mini-boss and the boss have their own theme. The False Knight's theme uses the leitmotif, by the way, in a remarkably constructed piece. It is only from Green Path that the theme settles in the music in the most beautiful way. The knight has now defeated the first boss, and bearer of the city crest, they can venture into Green Path. The discovery goes on, although questions remain, but we're more and more confident, and that's something the NPCs will notice. That's why the theme now appears in one of the most beautiful musics of the game. To make the transition with the beginning of the game, and again avoid sounding too plaintive, the theme is played like in Dirtmouth, but the composer, in order for the theme to grow and emphasize this assurance that the knights themselves are not supposed to feel, they have no emotions, but that the NPCs find in them, well, the composer introduces a counterpoint on the English horn, the two tones blending together perfectly. High register and the syncopated rhythm of the quarter note duplets on the English horn elegantly illustrate this confidence the knight and the player both have gained. Moreover, for the first time the music sounds more structured. It is supported by a harp ostinato, we are not far from the Queen's Gardens, whose instrument, as for the king, is the harp, which, although delicate, takes more place as the music becomes richer. This piece develops in a particularly organic way. Let's have a thought for the very pretty flute clarinet transition on the E, which leads to the leitmotif in its original form, but slightly changed to blend in the harmony. In the first area we explore that actually looks alive, the music underlines the cyclical aspect of the plants, starting with mostly fifths, and culminating when the very nice action layer is triggered. Dynamic without ever being excessive, which adds further to the counterpoint already rich but still limpid. The way the viola phrases seems almost different at this point, even more assertive, although it's actually the same phrasing as the very beginning of the piece. The counterpoint changes our perception. I have already mentioned how the music emphasizes the dimensions of the various areas. Here, as in Crystal Peak, we can also hear the sound moving, especially the marimba interventions going from right to left, as if flying away like these adorable masked flies do as soon as we get too close to them. I think this is my favorite piece in the whole soundtrack, and quite sincerely, it is one of my favorite pieces, full stop. The exchanges between the viola and the English horn, maybe it's nothing, but it reminds me of the vegetation which develops the lovely notes of thorns, and when there's the leitmotif again on the clarinet, for me, again, it's just the way I hear it, it's a way to show that the knight starts to identify with the world around them, that they recognize themselves in this place. After all, they meet other vessels, like the one in Hornet's boss room, and they belong to this kingdom, plus they meet Hornet in Green Path, and Hornet is part of the family. After Green Path, we venture into Fungal Waste, whose theme uses the leitmotif again. But then the game opens up, and so does the music. The progression becomes much more open, you have multiple choices regarding where to go next, and the knight, as they meet other NPCs, becomes familiar with Hallownest's lore. It is therefore quite natural for the music to feature other themes. The adventure opens up for the little hero. Through these first elements, it becomes clear that the music in Hollow Knight is not just an accompaniment, it is a very strong narrative element.